One of my goals as a leader is to honestly never be the best person at any specific job. The moment that I'm the best at any role is a moment that I believe myself as a leader, I've failed. I should be hiring best in class in all of these areas and then lead and allow, and really at some point get out of the way.
What if you, being the best person in the room, actually reduces the value of what you are creating as a leader? I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from Paul Wiley. He is the founder and CEO of RSLNT, where he works with executives to build resilience that actually holds up under pressure. Now, there's a novel idea. Before founding RSLNT, Paul built and led businesses at the intersection of technology, travel, and healthcare, including co-founding the company Opargo in 2014. Now, why would I mention the year? What is important about that? Well, it's because of the business that Opargo was in. Opargo was in AI-driven healthcare. AI all the way back in 2014. I think it's safe to say that our guest today, Paul Wiley, was well ahead of his time. In this episode, you'll hear how literal mountaintops can make us better at handling the hard challenges of leadership. You'll learn what Paul means when he talks about meaningful collisions. And you'll get a chance to adopt an entirely new definition of what it means to go for a walk. But first, we get to hear how a single comment from a wise coach 35 years ago still influences Paul as a person and leader today. Here we go.
I still remember probably 12 or 13 years old, and I was waiting for a tennis court with my coach, and he, of course, back then there were no phones because that's how old I am. So clearly dating myself.
I relate to that. I understand that. I know some
exactly.
People don't. I'm with you.
So in doing so, today you would be on your phone looking at whatever, and but back then that wasn't in place. So what did I do as a 13, 14-year-old kid? I just sat back and laid down and was about to take a nap. But my coach said, while we were waiting for the court, there were these four ladies. I still remember it as of yesterday. Four ladies playing tennis, and I at the time didn't think they were that great. So I was just like, I'll just sit back. And he looked at me and he said, watch them. And I'm like, really? He goes, you can learn from anyone. See what they're doing, see what they're doing well, see what they're not doing well. But the most important thing to do is to pay attention. And if you're paying attention in these circumstances, you will learn and grow. If you just sit back and wait your turn, you will miss out on opportunities. And I thought that was so cool because it was one where, of course, here I am, 35 years later or so, if I was 12 or 13 at the time. And he said, just be aware and be observant, and you can learn from anyone and any time. And it's fascinating to me that I still remember that moment just like it was yesterday. So that's been one of the really cool things from a leadership perspective very early on.
That is fascinating because you can imagine a scenario where some other 13 or 14-year-old hears that instruction and it just, maybe they say, okay, but it doesn't stick with them for 35 years. Why do you think it's stuck with you so profoundly for all of this time?
Yeah, I think because I've seen it play out in my life. I've seen it where if I've been observant and tried to figure out how I can learn and grow from others, then I've carried it with me. And so, one of the companies that I started called Opargo, we actually applied the AI aspects of the airline industry into healthcare for scheduling. And we did this back in 2013, 2014 is when we started that company, long before anyone was doing AI in healthcare. Back then, we actually had to change it and say it wasn't AI because people thought we were evil. So it was, predictive analytics and those types of things. But we said, hey, is there an opportunity to apply the predictive analytics, the AI aspects of the airline industry into healthcare? And I did it just by listening to my co-founder, who was a doctor. And he said, hey, I'm working more, I'm making less money, and the patients who need care the most aren't getting in. Can you help? And that just started out with that conversation. And in that respect, it's been interesting as you open up awareness, you put the phone down, you put away Instagram, sorry, Instagram, but you put it away and you say, hey, I'm gonna be aware. I'm gonna hear what's and watch what's going on and see what I can learn.
Well, that's a good bridge as you're talking about learning, but you're also talking about moving in a space much earlier than most around AI. As you got into the founding of Apargo, talk a little bit about the lessons learned, the bumps along the way. I guess I'm making the assumption that there were some
Yeah,
bumps.
yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about that idea, that experience of founding Apargo.
Let me start with this. If you're a founder and you didn't have bumps along the way, you're not a founder. It's not
Here,
one of
here, here, here.
let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And Tim, you can appreciate that as well. Um, but I think, if I take a step back, what's really interesting is how we came about starting Opargo. It was actually at SMU, went to grad school there and was truly sitting next to a doctor who had this problem that I mentioned. But what's interesting, we had to, in order to graduate from SMU's, from the grad school, you have to create a business. And that's your senior thesis. And so we ended up doing that, and some people took it all the way to a business. Others said, "I'm just gonna create a business plan and see, and then go back to my job." But we said, "Hey, let's see if there's something actually here." And as part of it, we ended up coming up with this idea, starting the business, and then at the end, you actually pitch it to a bunch of VCs. And we were fortunate enough to do well, get some funding out of it, and start the business. So, as that happened, of course, my initial thought was, boy, starting a business is easy. All you have to do is just sit next to somebody, come up with an idea, and then you get funded. So yeah, that's clearly a very simple thing to do, which I have very much learned after a while is not the case.
Yeah. So, talk a little bit more about the tech involved. And then, as you get past the initial funding stage, what were some of the leadership observations you were making in yourself and others as you're getting this startup off the ground?
What's interesting, and you mentioned this as well, Tim, is that we were on the very early stage. So we were not only having to prove out that we were the right partner to customers, but we also had to prove out that there was actually a need.
Sure,
And that
you got a
um,
double prove there because
Exactly,
yeah, wow.
exactly. Well, we called it, and someone coined this as evangeselling. You have to evangelize that there's a need, and then you
I
have to
like it. Yeah,
sell all over again to say that you can meet that.
yeah.
So that was just one of those challenges that I hadn't run into in the past, um, and in doing so, um, we started out obviously needing to find some early adopters, some people who said, "Yeah, I'm willing to take a chance because I do have this need, and I do think that that can happen, and we can solve this problem for them." But in doing so, what's really cool is we started to have more and more conversations with customers, more and more conversations with patients, more and more conversations with individuals who said, "You are solving a real problem that I have." And that's what it went back to is this something that's solving a real problem? And is there true value to the customer? And in this case, what it was we knew that there were fractures coming in at the hospital at 10 a.m. on a Monday, and we would hold slots to make sure that patient could get in. And we knew that a no show was happening 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. So we would double book that slot to make sure it didn't go empty. And that sounds like a really small, kind of minutia type of thing. But when you're thinking about the doctors are overworked, the healthcare access system is just completely in shambles, the opportunity to make sure patients could get in when they need care the most was something that was really fulfilling for us. And again, a lot of work. We were able, though, to prove it out and then scale it up and fortunately sell it. After the as I've said to others, it was a 8-year overnight success. So, so we were able to sell it, but
Yeah.
it was a tough but good experience.
Talk about the scope a little bit when you got to well, I won't say the end, but the transition point of selling. How many clients are we talking about? How many employees are we talking about at that point in time?
Yeah, so we had 20,000 or so doctors on the system, which would allow us to obviously build this out and move it forward. And we were still, what was really nice, we were still a pretty lean team, under 50 or so employees in the organization because we had built pieces around it. Um, but and that included contractors and others. But in that regard, we were able to then, as part of the transition or transaction, excuse me, move everybody over to full time jobs. And I think back of some of the successes of the business and things I'm most proud of. One is we never missed payroll. So that it was a win. And then number two, everyone got a job at the new company
Wow.
and were well taken care of as part of the transaction. So those were two things, and I would say are highlights of the business. Obviously, building is great, but how you treat employees and how employees benefit from the journey that they're on with you is just an absolute blessing, but also rewarding too.
Yeah. For those listening who may not have ever been in a startup atmosphere, it really is saying something to say we never had to miss payroll. It might sound like, well, what do you mean? It's like, well,
Yeah, right.
when you're on that roller coaster, that is something that could happen, and definitely something to be excited about that it didn't, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right, so let's talk about what it means to sell your baby.
Hmm.
You give birth to this thing. You give, I'm just going to assume, countless hours and energy to the startup of this. And of course, many people start businesses with this as the dream. We got it to a
Right.
certain point. It was valuable enough to others that they wanted to make the investment in to purchase it. But yet they're still letting go. And you stayed on after the sale to Veradigm. So Veradigm, some people may be more familiar with the company Allscripts, who was
Yep.
previously. They purchased this, and you stay on. Just walk us through the letting go and the staying on, and all of the mentality of leading and founding that goes along with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, I'll just share a funny story. 2 days before we're about to close the transaction with Veradigm, I get a call from the president there who said, "Hey, congrats! We're really looking forward to moving forward with this transaction." Which because I didn't know why he was calling 2 days before. Of course, I'm worried, and he said, "By the way, we're going to have you obviously continue to run Opargo, but also run sales for us." So I sold my business and I got two jobs out of it. So congratulations, which was not expected, but it was interesting because what it did for me though was it allowed me to kind of um, continue to trust in the team that I built from Opargo and have team members move forward there while at the same time I could focus on other parts of the new business that I was getting up to speed to learn. And so that kind of idea of how do I hand over the baby was almost out of necessity because of the fact of I had a bunch of new responsibilities as part of that transaction, which wasn't expected. But I think in the long run, it actually worked out really well for me because it allowed that transition process to happen a little bit more knife edge than probably expected, and that I would have maybe wanted, but it helped in the long run.
It brings up an interesting point in my mind because I've seen many owners of businesses who want to sell, and maybe they've been in that business for decades, and what they haven't done is what you did. They haven't built up the team and the process, the infrastructure and the support and the leadership, frankly. They're such an integral part of that when they go to talk to an investor or even a competitor who might be interested in purchasing them, what they find out, much to their chagrin, is that if you take them out of the equation, that takes an enormous part of the value of the business out. because they haven't built it up to run without them. And
Yep.
so the irony of ironies is you're trying to build this valuable thing. The more and more you can get out of, by means stepping out of the business so that
Mhm.
you're building it to run on its own, the more valuable it becomes in the marketplace.
Yep.
And you obviously did that, because if you can knife edge that transition, it means that you built a team that was able to carry that on its own, even though you were still around. So, I
Mhm.
mean, well done by you to be able to, weather that surprise request. It clearly shows that you built something that was valuable, even if you weren't sitting in the main seat as much.
Right, right. Yeah, thanks for that. And one of my goals as a leader is to honestly never be the best person at any specific job. So I will tell you that the head of sales for Opargo was a way better salesperson than I ever was. And my operations leader, way better at ops than I ever was. And the data person, way better at data than I ever was. The moment that I'm the best at any role is a moment that I believe myself as a leader, I've failed. I should be hiring best in class in all of these areas and then lead and allow, and really at some point get out of the way. And I think that's what I was fortunate to be able to do with this team is to say, I'm going to make sure that the team members who are here are exceptional at their area of ownership, and then allow them to push a business forward, whether I'm involved or less involved moving forward.
I'm so influenced by the research that I've had a chance to be a part of, that I can't move on to the next part of the story without digging deeper on what you just said. Because ultimately, there's a person behind the actions you just described. Somebody who doesn't need to be the best in the room, somebody who doesn't even want to be the best in the room. And there's all kinds of things related to identity and ego, humility or lack thereof. What is it that grew you into a spot where you, unlike many leaders, frankly, are comfortable and even excited to not be the most capable person in the room? How did you get there mentally?
Think because you just see that you can't do it alone. So that's number one. And if you try and do it alone, then you will make the business stagnant. You will slow growth if you try and do it alone. And then two, just find really, really good people that you trust and who are great at what they do. But the fact is my head of sales was not a great product person, and she never wanted to be, and she never would be. And my ops person was never great at data, let's say. But but in that respect, a leader, from my perspective, in my opinion, our job is to be able to ensure that those next level leaders, as I like to dig into, that they get along exceptionally well. They have clarity, they have direction, and they're able to do their jobs. And and so I think that's a big, big piece around it. Um, the other thing too, and Tim, I'm curious of your opinion on this as well. I've invested in a bunch of small companies in the past as well, and the founder led business always gives me a little bit of nervousness, especially if it's the guy, the woman, the man who is leading it.
Mhm.
I always look at the layer two leaders, understand how strong is layer two. Um, if this company has a strong layer two, the likelihood for success will be so much greater. And so I believe that's a key aspect of any business is not just saying how is the CEO, but how are the VPs, how are the C levels beneath them. That will be a true indicator of potential success, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, at a base level, evaluating any organization, you're talking about eliminating risk factors.
That's right.
And you hate to talk about it in a morbid way, but if the leader of the organization is magically not there for one reason or another, there is a value proposition for any investor to consider to say, okay, now who are we and what can we do?
That's right.
And if it hasn't been set up in that second level to be people who can truly lead the business because it was so dependent on the founder, then you not only have an organizational problem, but you have an investment problem at that point.
Hmm.
And so, to me, I think your perspective on looking at that second layer very closely when
Hmm.
you're thinking about investing in an organization has tons of wisdom behind it. So
Yeah.
I'm with you all the way on that. Now I want us to get to what you're up to now, because
Hmm.
me it's really exciting to look at somebody like you who has your background stepping into the space where you currently are. But before we get there, I have one other stop we want to make before we get to that, which is you eventually leave Veradigm and spend some time at Avoda. Talk a little bit about what you were up to there, what Avoda was up to, and
Sure.
how that came to be.
Yeah. So, and a quick funny story is I left Veradigm, wrapped up my time there. My wife asked, big accomplishment, really excited, and she was happy for us of selling the business. She's like, "So what do you want to do? What's the reward? Do you want a new car? Do you want a house? What do you want to do?" And my statement to her was, "I want to go for a walk." That's all I wanted. So I ended up doing the Camino in Spain and walking
Uh,
30 days across Spain, which was just phenomenal, absolutely fantastic. And what it allowed me to do, one is it allowed me to really extend my Audible subscription because I plugged in books the entire time, and I think I got through 18 books over the course of
wow.
the 30 days, which was fantastic.
Now,
But it
did you go
also
by?
just
So did you go by yourself?
so the first 3 weeks I was by myself, and then the last week, a friend joined me for the last week. So I would say the first 3 weeks was a pilgrimage. The last week was more vacation for sure. But
Yeah.
but it was great, and it was one where it's amazing to be able to just spend that time thinking, praying, being alone, but then also learning and just understanding.
I'm just imagining because I feel it inside my chest right now. How many leaders listening are thinking, "Oh my goodness, 3 weeks by myself." that would be that would be both amazing and for some of us terrifying, all at the same time because we're so used to being so needed and so busy. What
Mhm.
would happen if I just eliminate that den for 3 whole weeks? By the way, I think, in addition to those thoughts, you've also redefined what it means to go for a walk for all of us. I do that after dinner in the evenings, most evenings, but
Yeah.
you've taken it to, another level.
It was a
Um,
long walk, but it was still just a walk.
I don't wanna skip too quickly past because now I'm starting to see a connection between this story and where you have ended up, where you're heading, but take us a little bit, as you would into those 3 weeks of solitude and walking. You're coming out of really amazing success, but what happens to a person when you're by yourself for 3 weeks? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I mean, so a few things. One is, and some people might think poorly of me because of this, but I did not stay in the hostels that a lot of I told my wife, I'm like, look, and she's amazing. Jerry's awesome, and she wanted me to do this, and she was excited for me to do it. Um, but I was like, look, I don't really want to stay in a hostel in a bunk bed with a 22-year-old German who's snoring. I'm like, this isn't a penance for me. This is a reward. So to be clear, stayed in hotels along the way, which was fantastic. But it was typically anywhere from 12 to 20 miles of walking each day. I had a playlist downloaded of different books. And, a lot of people, again, the purists might say, you need to be quiet. You can't have any, you need to talk to others along the way. But from my perspective, it was one where I just love the opportunity to continue to learn and grow. And how often is there that opportunity to try and hear 18 books over the course of a few weeks and learn from them? And so listen to those. Obviously, met people along the way as well. But what's amazing through is, I guess, a couple things. You, the thought process changes in respect of how you're thinking, how you're um, what's going through your mind, how you handle solitude, which is very interesting. But then the second thing is obviously you get really fit. So nothing like doing 600 miles or something over the course of a month. You're going to end up being in pretty decent shape, at least walking wise.
Yeah.
But it was a really really good experience, and at the end it actually felt like it was that. that capstone to the business. Delayed by a couple of years of wrapping up work, but it was one where I'm like, okay, I'm done now. Let's figure out
Wow.
what's
So
next.
almost like a turning the page event in a way. Is that fair to say?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which was really cool. And it was fun to do it with a good friend of mine who was there and joined me at the end too. So it was fantastic. And the other thing too is, I mean, absolutely stunning, completely gorgeous. I mean, I took the northern route, which is along the coastline. And so, nothing like walking along the coast of Spain for 4 weeks. And yeah, talk about spoiled to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm imagining that probably some people are now making plans as they hear this story. Like
Let
that
let
just
me know.
yeah.
I'm here to help.
There you go. I'm also thinking there's some people are probably dying. Like, what? Give us one or two of the books that you listened to that left a mark.
So one of them for sure that is fantastic, by Tyler Staton, "Praying Like Monks, Living Like Fools."
Yeah,
So good.
that is an
Just
incredible book. For
yeah.
those that are so
Abs
inclined, that's an
Mhm.
amazing book.
Yep. I think I made it through 2 or 3 Patrick Lencioni books as well.
Yep,
And then let's see, All It Takes Is a John Acuff, All It Takes Is a Goal,
yep,
which is really, really good. Story Brand,
yes.
is one. And then the other one, I'm not sure if you've read, by Phil Vischer, Me, Myself, and Bob.
I have
So
it, but I
good.
haven't read it yet, even though it's not a
So good.
recent book. But that's yeah,
So those are a few that I could definitely recommend, and huge fans of those. But it was just, yeah, it was cool. It was good. Have some business aspects of it, some spiritual aspects of it,
yeah.
but then also growth opportunities through it as well.
Yeah. So I mentioned Avoda, so I feel obligated that we pause there for just a moment before we get to the really fun part of what you're up to now. But tell us about your time. Then you finish your walk, you go to Avoda. What do you do there? What was that about for you as a leader in the next
Sure.
step?
Yeah. So Avoda is two divisions. It has a Bible it uses AI to translate the Bible, as well as to be an autonomous scribe in healthcare. So figure that one out, right? How
Wow,
those two.
what a
Yeah,
combo!
exactly. Yes, what a combo. So, and of course, the concept is that you're translating a conversation, or translating content. In that regard, you have to translate multiple things from a physician's perspective of clinical information, billing information, patient information. So it's really a AI translation company, which
Hmm,
just is so amazing. And it's one where I joined it because of the mission associated with translation,
mhm.
and the difference that could be made in that regard. Um, and was there for a couple of years, but I think I shared this with you, Tim, once before when we spoke. There's been this constant like poking and then pushing and then prodding to do this business that I've put off for a while. And so in it, I've been able to really double down on what we're doing now, and super excited about Resilient.
Yeah, good. Well, let's get to that. For those that are watching on video, you see that Paul doesn't know how to use vowels. And and so we're going to talk
We're
about
yeah.
RSLNT Resilient. Talk us through this thing that you're now a founder again. Welcome back.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
talk to us about how you're taking all that you've experienced previously, and what is this poking and prodding, this urge, this longing, where has it brought you to? What is Resilient doing?
Yeah. I mean, so Resilient. So thanks for saying it well. As I've said before, we're a startup, so we can't afford vowels. So in that respect, but what it is the story behind it. And it's interesting. I've been doing Resilient, been working on Resilient actively for 6 years, because it started out doing it on the side. It started out where I wanted to do an adventure out to South Africa, and was able to do that. But my wife, very kind, but also very wise, said, don't go there alone. So ended up inviting a handful of my buddies to come along as well. So we went to Africa, did an adventure out there, which was just fantastic. And out of it, though, what was interesting is we wrapped it up and everyone said, well, we don't want this to stop in two ways. One is in the community and the relationship that was built.
Mhm.
And then secondarily in the opportunities or in the doing hard things that came out of it as well. So what we did was we ended up starting a 6:30 in the morning group of guys, executives getting together, going through leadership materials, through books, just learning and growing together. And then, of course, we said, well, we went to South Africa. Well, what's next? So what are we going to do next? And in this group as well, a number of us do Ironman races and stuff like that together as well. Just kind of trying to do one hard thing every year. That's the goal. And so we ended up a year later going and climbing Cotopaxi, a 20,000-foot volcano in Ecuador, which was amazing and crazy hard. And then it just kept on repeating. And what's interesting is as we were doing it more and more, people heard about it and they asked if they could join as well. And so every year for the last 6 years, we've been on a few of these different adventures and the group has grown, or we've done multiple trips. And now there's people who have said, wait, can you do this with my company? Can
Mm.
you pull together this kind of coaching and adventure for my CEOs from the private equity groups, and so that's what I've been able to do in the past, a little bit on the side. And what I'm excited about is now we've been doing that here today and scaling and growing it across a ton of different executives and leaders right now.
So the way you organize it is that it's ongoing leadership development, but somewhere in the mix, there's a big trip experience that
Mhm.
requires some level of physicality from the people that
That's
are
right.
involved. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I mean, the foundation of it is that resilience. I believe by doing hard things and accomplishing hard things, being out of your comfort zone, then you are able to accomplish and handle hard things in business and in life. Um, you know, the reality is someone says, "I don't like to do hard things." Well, how are you a leader then? How are you going to handle it when you have to fire someone?
Mm.
How are you going to handle it when you're not sure if you're going to make payroll? Doing hard things and being outside of your comfort zone allows you to prepare for those areas when they come up. Because it's not a question of if, it's a question of
Oh,
when
that's true.
they arise.
Yeah.
And and so in it, though, I believe also you need to be growing not just from a leadership and a skill perspective, but also from a physical aspect and a mental or a spiritual place too.
Mm.
Um, it's very clear, and the research supports this, that um, healthy leaders are more productive. They lead better teams. They are more effective when you're healthy. You're coming together more wholly from a business perspective. And from those who have purpose, whether the spiritual aspect of it, whether it's Christian or any other purpose that you're aligned with, those also correlate to lower mortality rates, early mortality rates, as well as just a better overall EQ associated to. And
Wow.
so our
That's
intent
interesting.
here is to say, let's make sure that as we're growing, we're not just growing in our leadership, we're growing in our health, we're growing in our fitness, we're growing in our mental and spiritual wellness. And then, by the way, let's put it to the test. Let's go hike Machu Picchu. Let's
Yeah.
go to Scotland for a few days. Let's do Pikes Peak
Yeah.
or go to Cotopaxi, because that's where it's put to the test. That's where it grows. But also, that's where community happens. And I think that's the key piece too here is it's not just about the training and the growth. It's about the community that you build amongst similar leaders while you're in this process, because you can't do it alone.
Hmm. What would you say to somebody who said, that sounds amazing and interesting, the challenge, the community, but that all is, in some cases, literally a mountaintop experience? Whenever this is over, I got to go back to real life,
Hmm.
which is not not Cotopaxi.
Right.
It's a little bit more in the valley of things that are challenging and normal. What do you say to somebody who has a question about, hey, I'm not always going to be on top of the mountain. How does this
Hmm.
apply?
Yeah, I mean, first, you're right. You know, you every day you're going to be at different parts of the mountain, good or bad. The question number one is, are you prepared for it? So
Mm,
when you're not at the mountaintop, are you ready? And mentally, physically, spiritually, are you ready? So that's number one. But the number two is just because you're not on the mountain with that group of 8 to 10 fellow leaders doesn't mean that they aren't with you as you move forward.
okay.
Because so often this people say, "Well, okay, I'm done. Now I'm just going to move on." But what we see is this community continues to build and grow. You send texts to similar leaders to say, "Hey, I had this problem. Can you help me solve it?"
Hmm.
Or, "Hey, I'm running into this issue with this employee. Do you have any ideas?" That continues. It doesn't stop on the side of a mountain. Actually, those relationships grow and get deeper because you are on the side of the mountain together. Um, there's nothing quite like being tested and even humiliated on the side of a mountain to lower your pride and lower your ego and be
Ah,
more vulnerable with others who are in the same spot with you.
yeah, yeah. You spend so much time with leaders, not just CEOs, but certainly they're in that mix as well as high level leaders, and you get a chance to see them at their worst in some cases with what you're doing. What are some of the shortcomings or issues you routinely see with leaders that Resilient ends up working with them on?
Yeah, I think the main thing I would hit on is, and I'm fine. I felt it myself, and I don't know, Tim, if you felt this way as well, but CEOs more and more today are lonely. It is a lonely job. To be the one person in charge is a lonely job, and it's something that um, I believe executives need to be purposeful about. You're not going to solve it just by working harder. You're not going to solve it by working more hours. You're going to solve it by being in community, being in groups, being in engagements with people like you who are in that similar spot as well. And that's what I think continues to build and grow these relationships. Meaningful collisions or not, the fact is this type of engagement um, of any sort amongst executives allows community, which in many cases isn't happening today because you're putting that on the side. You're going to make sure you're working on business. You're going to make sure you're with your family. You're going to make sure these things which are critical important. But don't forget that you have to do this together. Life was not meant to be lived alone, and the CEO job, while singular, isn't meant to be done alone either.
What kinds of things have you seen as you have introduced the idea of community to those that may not have prioritized it? What's been the result of that as you've had a chance to observe that?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is um, there is a level of accountability associated with it. When you are talking to another leader who has been in your situation before, there is that opportunity to say, "How did you handle this? And did you handle it the right way?" So I think accountability is one which correlates to another great book, Mission Drift, which goes to that fact of any sort of small movement adjustment in the long run could be significant over time. And so making sure that there's community to build and have that relationship, but also to have that accountability to say, "Hey, how are you doing? How are things? How's business? How's life? How's the family?" Because otherwise, there are many days and many weeks and months where executives are sitting here saying, "How am I going to solve this problem?" And there's someone just in one building over who has had the exact same problem and solved it before too.
Now, I know that as you foster and facilitate these experiences, not only with the trips, but in the in between work that you do as well with these groups of leaders, that you lean into this idea of meaningful collisions. And first of all, let me just say, if I don't even get past those first two words, I'm like, oh man, what is this? Talk to us about this concept that you share with the leaders that you're influencing.
Yeah. So I can take no credit except for stealing it, right? It goes back to observing and learning from others. But SMU's dean of business at the time, Tom Perkowski. This was one of his big things. You're in the room with 80 or so different leaders, executives at SMU going through grad school, and his statement is: make sure that every collision with someone else is meaningful. Make sure that you have these engagements with others that that you can learn and grow from. And so often you think about it and you say, well, that's very self-serving. I'm just going to, take away. But what I find is if the meaningful collisions, you focus on the other person first, it benefits you so much in the long run. And it might not be immediate. You might not be ever that you see in the short term. But the fact is that you build relationships, you understand, you learn, and you grow from others instead of just passing by someone or not asking a question or not engaging. Really be real, understand who they are, what they're doing, and how you can help.
We're in a world, and maybe we always have been, and it's just, more poignantly so with the speed of technology. But it seems to me that, especially in the business community, we're invited to see what we can get. How much can we get? And you can translate that into a lot of different ways. It's not only financial, but obviously that would be there as well. I've found over time that if we can have a little bit of discipline to disconnect from that concept. Yeah, I know we were talking about earlier. I know we need to make payroll. I
Hmm.
know that we need certain things in order for this business to work. None of that goes away. But the dynamic of interaction between people. I mean, I've seen it within myself. When I show up to bless or give or encourage, at least in my own life, it becomes much simpler. The interactions feel so much better. Now, I have a faith and trust that in the end, whatever we need will eventually show up. And I realize maybe not everybody has that level of confidence that it will be okay. But I can testify to what you're talking about there to say, well, if I'm going to make it meaningful, it is a different equation to say the meaningful collision is about giving than
Hmm.
receiving. And
Hmm.
um, it simplifies everything, at least in my experience. What are your thoughts about that?
I totally agree, and I think people can tell when you're just trying to get something out of them. Right? It's so easy to see and feel when they're like, "Oh, they're just engaging because they want something." But if you turn the script and you say, "How can I help you? How are you doing?" It changes things. It changes almost that initial, immediate dynamic of the relationship to say, "What can I do for you?" And and I think that's just a piece that's missed so often in business today. Because as you said, it's, hey, what do I need to do to make payroll? What do I need to do to build this business? What do I need to do to grow? But if you say, what can I do to help you? It completely changes the relationship and the conversation from the start. And as long as it's genuine, I think people see it and they feel it and they know.
To me, it is so fun that we got to go a little bit on the life journey there with Paul, as we got to hear his story through entrepreneurial launch and then all the different twists and turns along the way that have eventually led him into what he's doing now with Resilient. There are a couple of things that I want to point out as we wrap up today. I want to start with his comment about doing hard things. It's perhaps a reality that we're not that excited about, but in order to be able to do hard things, we have to practice doing hard things. So he's talking about taking people on these challenging trips, but for many of us, we can just think about a normal workout. When you're lifting weights, what's actually happening? You're actually tearing muscle down so that it builds back just a little bit more. So there's a difficulty to it that results in more capability. And as Paul walks his clients through this experience with Resilient, they're not only doing that at some level physically, but they're doing it mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. They're practicing doing hard things so that they can show up as leader with the ability to do hard things, which leads me to a question, maybe you as well. how do we get excited about practicing doing hard things? Most of us spend too much of our lives trying to avoid having to experience hard things. So how could we actually get excited about it? And I think the answer to that lives in our perspective. Now, some of you might be familiar with the work of Angela Duckworth on grit and how that inner quality, how being gritty actually precedes and predicts success. But it requires us to do gritty things. In other words, to become grittier, to be able to do hard things, we have to practice doing things that challenges us. And this perspective that I'm referring to is, what if when we're doing hard things, whether it be physically or mentally, what if we understood that more was going on than just accomplishing the task? What if we knew that as we did hard things, we were also growing our capability to do hard things in the future? Would it make it easier for us to do those hard things in the moment? Let me give you an example of this that might help. A number of years ago, I was on a long trip, which is to say I had a lot of bags, and I was in a tiny hotel for which the elevator was broken. This is a small hotel with a very narrow stairway, and I had a bunch of bags at the end of a long day. And I just told myself, all right, part of a little exercise for the day is I'm going to make a game out of this. I'm going to get to the 5th floor where my room is without stopping. And I had enough bags and probably was out of shape enough that was going to be challenging. But I told myself this story that I'm inviting you to tell yourself, hey, there's more going on than getting the bags to the 5th floor. I'm now working on my grit. And so by the time that I got to the 3rd floor, I can tell you my body was making a strong request for me to stop and take a break. But the thing that helped me keep going was to say, hey, I'm doing more than just getting to the 5th floor. I'm working on my grit in this small little tiny way, just going up these stairs, not a huge endeavor, but that mentality, that understanding that I am growing just this tiny little bit in my grittiness by saying I'm not going to stop until I get there, actually gave me the energy to keep going in order to develop that grit within me. So it's a silly little small example, but what if we applied that to the various challenges that we have, whether they be physical or relational, mental or spiritual? What if we had the perspective that we're not just getting the thing done, but I'm also becoming grittier so that I can handle the challenges ahead? Finally, as we wrap up, I want to talk about this idea that Paul shared, never be the best in the room. There's a very real business proposition to this. As we talked about, I don't want to be the best person in the room because if everything hinges on me, then we're a less valuable organization. We need to have found, recruited, retained, and developed people who are better than we are in every way, because that solidifies the value of the organization. I don't have to be here in order for it to be as valuable as it can be. And so there's a question for us, like, how do we do that? And I think it has to do with some inner work. Does your ego, and by the way, I could ask the same question of myself, does my ego, does my sense of identity or your sense of a lack of identity, does that allow us to have people around us who are smarter and more capable than we are? I could argue that if we are willing to do the inner work that allows more capable, that even goes to find more capable people to be around us, that it will be the same as writing a financial check to yourself in the future. I have actually seen senior executives get leaders removed from meetings because they were personally threatened by the capabilities of those leaders. I've seen that. And when they did that, they made their organizations worse. They made their organizations less valuable because they couldn't handle more capable people being in the room with them. And so that leads me to the question I want to leave you with today. And that is this: what are you doing to make sure you are not the most capable person in the rooms where you lead? This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you receive your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.